Welcome to Conversations with LSNTAP, where we meet interesting people and hear how they are increasing access to justice through technology. Here's your host, Shellie Reid.
Hey, thank you for joining us today. My name is Shellie Reid. I am the manager of the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project, and I'm here today with Cara Peterson and Rich DiBona, the founders of DescrybeAI, and we're going, or descrybe.ai, and we're going to learn a little bit more about their company and a little bit more about them. So welcome. Why don't you start out by telling me a little bit about yourselves?
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here. We are in snowy Boston, Massachusetts, so happy to be joining folks across the country. My name is Cara Peterson. I am a co-founder of DescrybeAI with my husband, Rich DiBona. I am the business side and the marketing side of the company, and I will hand it off to Rich.
I am the tech side, and I wrote the platform and interfaced with the AI platforms and got everything ready and searching. And so since I'm a tech guy and she's a marketing person, we have some good synergy in complementary skills.
So that leads us into a great segue to our next question. How did you get where you are today? So what has your career path looked like up to this point?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because career paths are so winding sometimes, right? We end up in interesting places. So I never actually expected to be in marketing. I was pretty sure I was going to be a foreign correspondent. So here we go. You end up in these strange places, either that or a marine biologist. Those are the two options. But I did land in marketing in my early part of my career and really liked it. And I've been in higher education and sort of mission-driven organizations doing marketing for a couple decades now and really enjoy it. I worked closely with some of the public health schools up here in the Boston area and just have really enjoyed that work, science communications and the like. I did have a brief stint in my marketing career, higher ed marketing career at Suffolk Law School, Suffolk University Law School, which I'm sure many folks out there have heard of. And they do a great job with their technology programs. But I do not have a law background myself. I am not a lawyer. And so that is me. I'm a marketer through and through.
And I went through a traditional computer science path in college and worked at a bunch of corporations. And I learned a lot about architecture and programming and how to put together large scalable systems from working at some various places. And so so when it came time to do DescrybeAI, I had a lot of the architecture skills that are required for putting together a system that, as we found, it's just, kind of getting very busy very quickly. And so you have to be able to keep up with it.
Certainly. So I noticed some career crossover in the public health field when I was looking at your LinkedIn profiles. And I was just curious, is that how you met?
No, we didn't actually meet through work at all. It was, I was living in New York City, and this was right around 2001, I think. And I was actually at the time I was working in a startup, and I had decided that Boston was a great place to maybe move to. New York City was getting a little much for me. So I was deciding it was time to go after about 6 years. And my sister had moved up here and was working at MIT, and we had some family in the area, and Boston just felt like a really nice compromise. It's still a city, it's still bustling, it's still a great place, but it's a little more livable than where I was living in Hell's Kitchen at the time. So we met at just a friend's event, party up here in Boston a few weeks after I moved up. So it was
serendipity.
Very much so. Yeah.
Her sister was thrilled because she was looking forward to single life with Cara, and then she ended up meeting me just a couple weeks in.
We're like, we're gonna have so much fun. Yeah, we still had fun. But yeah, and it's interesting. So the social sort of justice space, like Rich and I have we have pretty similar interests. Like, again, like his professional area is much more in technology, but I've worked with a lot of like technology groups internally and talking about like communicating new technology and being really involved and interested in sort of new communications tools and things like that. And one of the things that we tend to really like to think about together is both entrepreneurship. So Rich has done some other cool startup sort of things in the past, and also just thinking about how technology can solve problems. And a lot of what we're interested in now in particular, and you can see through descrybe.ai, is how technology can be leveraged to solve some kind of intractable or seemingly intractable social issues, which obviously access to law is a huge, huge one that is both systematic and drives other inequities that we see. So there's a lot of interest in sort of that combination of how technology can leverage, be potentially used to make a better world, as long as people want to build it that way. So a lot of passion,
Certainly.
a lot of long walks with long talks about all these kinds of philosophical things. And then lo and behold, Rich built this thing. I didn't even know he was doing it. And then one day he said, well, I kind of made this thing. You want to look at it? And I was like, whoa, this is great. So
Awesome. We'll get more into that in just a moment, but before, still learning a little bit more about you, Cara, you introduced yourself to me on LinkedIn. So I wanted to ask both of you if there were any other social media channels that have helped you or played a role in your career path. Our listeners who are familiar with me know that social media had a huge impact on my career. So I'm always interested to hear others' experiences.
Yeah, Rich, do you want to speak to that first, and then I'll jump in?
In my field, I've worked through times when like tech people were in super high demand, even up to a few years ago, and so I never really had to publicize myself. It was just like you work at a place, and then when you're ready, you call a recruiter, or a recruiter calls you, and then you're just on to the next job after a few years. So I haven't really had to use social media other than like everybody else catching up with their high school friends that they hadn't seen in so many years on Facebook.
Yeah. And I'm almost the direct opposite, where as a marketer, and especially in higher education, where you're trying to attract, students, and also talk about the research that's happening, but particularly in public health or science communications, you're trying to meet people where they are, right? To influence them and have them think about certain things. Like I think about, a vaccine campaign or things like that, vaccine acceptance, things of that nature. Social media was like a huge part, and still is a huge part of what we do. So it's really funny because I've ridden so many different waves of, oh, here's this new tool. There's resistance. There's like not sure if this is something we should do or not. And then eventual acceptance. And then it becomes just part of what you do, and so I saw that with Facebook. And I have a funny lawyer story about Facebook if you want to hear it. There's
Sure.
So there's like Facebook, and then there's then there's Twitter, aka X, and TikTok. And I remember how many people were, do we have to get on TikTok now? I remember faculty saying that. Do we have to get on TikTok? So this is just a funny anecdote about Facebook. And I love the folks at Suffolk Law School, so I'm not trying to tease them. But when I was working there, I was the marketing director. And I remember going to one of the associate deans, who shall remain nameless, and said, we really should get the school on Facebook. It's really where our students, potential students would be, and we really want to reach them there. And he was horrified at the thought. And it was really funny because before I was working with lawyers, I was at an engineering school. I was at the Boston University School of Engineering. And so in marketing there, you say to the engineers, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And they'd be like, yeah, let's try it. What could happen? Right? What could happen? What's the worst that could happen? And then when I went to the law school, it's like, let's try this. And they're like, what's the worst that could happen? It was very funny. It was very different. So there was so much fear, and in the long run, maybe he would say, well, see what Facebook did to society. Maybe I was right. But, it was a really interesting change about the risk profile. And so that's something that I've kind of kept with me when I think about legal tech, although I think things are pretty different now, about like the, maybe somewhat different, about the sort of hesitancy to adopt new technology. And I know AI has a lot of inherent risks and downsides and ethical concerns and all sorts of things. But there's definitely something familiar about the moment we're in now with the, it's all bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You hear one bad story and lawyers like, oh, can't do it at all, ever. So,
The
yes,
risk
certainly.
profile. Yeah, the risk is, if there's any risk, it's best to avoid it. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, that was, keeping that story in mind will probably help you as you move forward in the legal tech field. You know already the attitudes and how difficult it can be to help persuade people, which is one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, is to bring the attention to new and up and coming companies that have something to say and that can help shape the future of law if we as lawyers are willing to try new things. So, that is certainly one of the reasons why I started the podcast. So going back to what you said a moment ago, Cara, Rich, she mentioned that you had already built something. So can you talk about how you went about building this tool and why?
Yeah, sure. Whenever new things come out, I like to play around with them. Like a few years ago, New York Times released an API, like a way to access all of their hundreds of years of articles. So I wrote this thing so that you could search through old New York Times articles and find them and all that. And so when OpenAI released ChatGPT a year ago, whatever it is, oh, it's probably been a little over a year now. But it's about a year ago when I started doing this, January, February. Um, I was looking at not just the chat GPT because that's what people were just kind of talking. Everybody knows what that is. But there were other ways to access the AI engine that OpenAI had or has. And so I was looking at other ways to do it, like through programs that were that I could write. And so there was this one thing that I saw where it could take complex text and summarize it. And I'm like, why wouldn't I feed in a legal document and see how it summarizes? Because I could have tried like a medical document, but I wouldn't have been able to tell if it did it right. So I fed in a legal judicial opinion, just one of them,
Mhm.
and I read it and I was like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. And then I said, why don't I look for ways to get a bunch of judicial opinions? And so I found a database. It was actually through Harvard, and I didn't end up using their data, but they have a giant database of case law. And so I read in cases from Massachusetts and got them in there. And then I had all these summaries of judicial opinions. And then there was another part of the AI engine that I found where you can make them kind of help make them searchable. So I put cobbled all that together to take the summaries that I had put in and made them searchable. And that's about when I showed Kara, I'm like, search for anything. And she typed in like ice cream truck and found a case about somebody who like sued
It
an
was,
ice cream truck
yeah, I
owner
think
or
it was
something.
about, somebody killed by an ice cream truck, I think is what it was. So I was
Yeah.
being very macabre. Right.
So yeah, so then we were both like, wow, this actually works better than we thought. And so we that's when we kind of put the pedal on the metal, so to speak, and I set the
Mhm.
audacious goal of trying to summarize every judicial opinion in the country. I'm almost done with that.
Awesome. So other than the huge amount of data, what are some of the
Yeah.
challenges you've met along the way?
Yeah, I would say the huge amount of data is a big one. The huge cost. The AI engines are not cheap. They're cheap when you're using them just to ask for simple Q&A, but we've churned through like billions words and millions of pages, and that kind of adds up. So that's the challenge. But another challenge, usability wise, I've been getting legal professionals and people who use it to think in terms of um, talking to our search engine in terms of legal concepts
Mhm.
rather than type in like this particular citation with the page number in parentheses and the exact terms.
Mhm.
that you might use on the other search engines that are out there. On ours, you just type in concept, like a person slipped in front of my store, and then it shows you a bunch of cases. And then you could say a person slipped in front of my store, and then you could narrow it down by saying on ice or in a pothole or in an unfinished road. And you could just have the thing, and then you could narrow it down by state, and it'll bring back all these opinions instantly that just show you all the case law that's related to your legal concepts. So you don't even have to know legal terms to use it. Although if you do know them, it'll match those and find them for you. But you just have to type in conceptually what you want, and that's where it helps people who aren't necessarily lawyers use it.
So I think you're kind of getting in there. So my next question was, what is wrong with the legal research system today? And I think you've kind of touched on that. But do you have any other thoughts on what makes the current system so difficult or needing to be changed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a car. Should I take that quick, or you want to go?
I have 10 million things to say, but you can say one thing first. I mean, you can say as many things as you want.
I'll say one thing first.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say that just not having to know the exact legal thing you're searching for. For example, there's an example on the homepage of our website where we talk about you could type in that a parent was coerced to change their will. And that's something that everybody might know what that is, even if you're not a lawyer. But then when you type that in, our system will associate it and find things about undue influence. And so that's when you know, like, oh, this is what actually happened, undue influence. And then you could go down and start searching for that more specifically. So it makes that association for you, and it helps you uncover cases that, for lawyers who do know the terms, they don't need to match exactly. Like if you say coerced to change a will in a the exact match, it doesn't know what you mean by will. It's like, will he go to the store, or will, so it's a no. And so it's hard to get those matches. And it knows what, by taking the words around it, it knows the concepts you're looking for, and it could do better matches. Okay, there's my one thing, Cara. Go ahead.
Okay, there you go. And one of the things we've heard some people say, so some of the sort of leading people who think about this narrow, world of legal tech, and sort of especially the prompt engineering and all the AI stuff, is it's uncovering what one person called the shape of the law in a way that is like different than whatever has existed. And you can find these related concepts and related sort of narratives that you might not have thought of. So it's not like, someone's, someone who needs to do something really specific for a legal situation they're in is going to go to descrybe.ai and solve it. It's part of the, it's part of the ecosystem. It can be part of helping people who are helping others, either legal aid people, pro bono, anyone really, students doing research, people, journalists who are trying to write about a certain topic and looking for a history of things. So it can give a lot of, I guess, rabbit holes to fall down, research rabbit holes, which can be really fun. And so back to when Rich was talking about when he said, hey, look at this thing I made, which I'm used to him doing. So that was fun. When I started to get really excited was when I started to see the implications of how it could serve people who weren't being served. That's when I got really, really excited, because just from personal experience, we had a very, we had something small where we needed to look up some information, and neither of us are lawyers, we're just regular folks. Not that lawyers aren't regular folks, but you know what I mean? We're non-legal professionals. And I remember just how hard it was to figure anything out, right? So you're this average person, you're trying to understand it. You hit paywall after paywall after paywall. So and we were looking up for a specific type of case, and I was just kind of looking around, well, gee, what happens in this space and how does it work? I remember hitting, Bloomberg Law paywall. So you can't even read about reporters writing about the issue, because that is a paywall too. So, and then if you want to read the case law, you know, Court Listener, thank goodness for Court Listener of the Free Law Project, which is where we get our data. So we love them. They're our buddies, you know, but they're making all this available, but you just can't access it, right? So I started to get really fascinated, and Rich did too. And remember, we would take these walk the dogs and just talk about this, about it's the law that belongs to us, but we can't see it and we can't understand it. And, you know, one of the things that really struck me is, you know, Rich and I are really fortunate, right? We can afford a lawyer if we need it. We can find ways to access this stuff, but we also know most people can't, or many people can't, when you think about how expensive it is to get help. And that's no dig at lawyers. I mean, they're professionals. They need to pay the bills too. But it feels like there has to be a better way, right? And that's where AI, I think, is the most exciting thing to me, because a lot of the reasons, from my perspective, and you can tell me if I'm got this right or not, but there's so much human power that has to go into a lot of this case analysis and sort of like summarization and shepherdizing and all these things that potentially, at least, AI could help with, which would lower costs significantly, I think. So that's where I started to get really excited about seeing this as something that could be pretty transformative. So
absolutely. Accessibility and being able to access the law. You're right. There's paywalls. I mean, even in my office, we don't pay for Westlaw or Lexis because we're not in the business of practicing law on a daily basis. So we don't use, you know, we're trying to use our funds wisely. So finding case law in other ways, you know, I'm able to use a service that's provided through my state bar association that allows me to do some research. But for the layperson, you know, average person on the street, where do they go? And it's very difficult. So I'm glad that segment came up, because it's really important for us to make sure that in this land where we're all supposed to have these protections, having systems that allow us to use those protections. You know, it's a really strange system that we have, where we're protecting people, you know, but we're not allowing them to access. So really interesting.
exactly.
So as you've been developing this and you see the potential, what myths and misconceptions about generative AI have you come up against in this process?
That's a good one, Rich. You want to take that with the hallucinations?
Yeah, I mean, we've found, because we're pre-summarizing, if you think of what we used to talk about our thing as, and we don't really anymore, but if you think about cliff notes for a novel, those cliff notes are just going to contain the summary for that novel you're reading. It's not going to magically slip in an article from Vanity Fair or something. And so because of the way we're using AI, we are just taking a block of text, like if it's a page or whatever, and saying, summarize this one page of text. And it does that independently and in a little black box where it doesn't go out to the internet. It doesn't do anything. It just summarizes that using its AI English language skills. And so we store all those summaries on our database. And then when you match them, it's not going out and checking anywhere else or generating things on the fly. It's just within our little closed architecture or closed environment that it's finding these summaries. So there's not really a chance for the hallucinations. And so when we kind of get in like, oh, all these AI tools hallucinate, we kind of try to push back about that, because the way we're doing it, it's possible, we haven't seen it, but it's possible that it could miss summarize something, but it's not possible for it to pull in false data or make up its own
Mhm.
citations or anything like that.
So I guess why don't we, Cara, if you had something else, feel free to interject in just a second. But
Mhm.
how does DescrybeAI or describe.ai work, and what are the benefits for users?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Cara.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you. So yeah, so it's got sort of two really neat advantages, I think. And it's Describe does this. I'm sure other solutions will do something similar, but because it relates to how AI works, right? So it helps lower so it gets rid of two of the biggest barriers that there are to accessing the law, which eventually hopefully helps with access to justice someday, right? Maybe. And one is the natural language search. So since you can do that ice cream truck or use natural language, it lowers that sort of like what I call a language barrier, right? Because not many of us speak legalese. It's its own language. It really is. And I'm sure it's easy to kind of forget that, but there's just terminology. There's a lot of Latin, like just, we just don't use that kind of language on a daily basis. And if you use the wrong, I think I kept at some point I was talking about disparate and desperate and kept, getting those mixed up. But anyway, so there's just, it's a fine art, and as it should be, and it takes a lot of time to learn. If you need a whole class in how to use, these search engines in law school, obviously it's pretty complicated. So that lowers a very significant barrier of just understanding what you're even asking for. And then for us in particular, we're free. So that's obviously a huge barrier that we're just free. So people can use our tool for free. There's no gotcha after 3 searches or something like that. It's really out there. So our tool, we did that on purpose. We obviously are interested in social justice, but we're not a nonprofit. But we did make it free because adoption is difficult for something this new and different. And so we decided, let's just make it free because, first of all, it's needed. And once people see it, and this is what always happens, is once people try it, they're like, oh, now I get it. Like, we have sitting judges who are using it. We have journalists, we have law students. Like, it's really fun to see it taking off. We don't track things. Like, people can go in there and do what they need to do. We're not going to know, it's pretty neat. So it almost sounds too good to be true, I suppose, but it is true. And it's not a complete solution, right? Like, it's not going to do everything, right? I mean, certainly the big players have a very, very broad, set of offerings. We're doing one thing, and we're doing it. We think we're doing it well. And we're really, really focused on that. So I would say our what we bring to the table is just how easy it is to use. Anyone can use it, and it's really low commitment. And finally, I think another thing I would say about what makes AI interesting, or what makes our version of AI interesting, is that you can go around and play with it without any risk. Right? Like, if you're a practicing lawyer and you play around with something and accidentally submit a made up case, that's really bad, right? And that's happened to some people. And I think that's more bad lawyering than bad technology, but that's okay. This is a way to kind of play around with what AI does and see, like, just get a sense. There's a low to no risk kind of way to just play in the sandbox, I would say, of AI. So yeah, Rich, I don't know what you'd add to that.
I mean, with regard to what it does, we have gotten feedback, like, it would be nice if we could search the old way that we're used to searching. And so we are actually adding in a parallel search engine that will allow you to search in the traditional way, the Boolean search, where you're typing in with the quotes and the pluses and the citation numbers, and you'll still be able to search with that. And so you could switch back and forth according to how you want to search. So that'll be kind of fun too. That'll be out in just a month or two. I'm loading all into that now.
How very legal.
Yeah. Yeah, what do you
Let's
call
make
that type
search
of
more difficult.
Yeah,
What do
right,
you-
right, exactly.
what do you call that type of searching in your profession? Like traditional searching.
I mean, I would guess Boolean, using
Yeah,
all the
that's
different
what, yeah.
search terms.
Mhm.
You know, there probably is a name for it, but
Boolean is
I
what I've been saying too. Yeah, that
Mhm.
works.
I mean, Boolean, you use the Boolean search terms
Keyword
and
searching, Boolean
keyword
searching. Yeah,
search. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, but if you can have natural language search, why do you need to make it more difficult? You know, but it's
Sometimes
very,
people are searching, that brings up a good point about what one thing or thing doesn't do well. Um, is because it is looking for putting words together in the English language and finding context. If you type in exact people's names, like,
Mm.
because every case has names associated with it, or um, just exact things that aren't part of our that aren't in the dictionary, it actually has a little bit of a harder time. It doesn't
Mm.
do exact matching as well. If you do a
Mm.
term, it'll do the exact match and find it. But if you type in somebody's name, it actually has a harder time than we were thinking. And so that's another reason is like if you do want to type in exact things and exact citation numbers and exact page numbers and references and find them in the opinions, this will bring them up and still show the summary for you so you could kind of read it quickly. But it's that way you don't have to use it, but you could toggle back and forth.
Mhm.
Gives us another
interesting.
reason, another way too, like you can use our thing instead of, like for your office, you could use our thing instead of hundreds a month if you needed to.
Yeah, exactly. I really like that you have gone with the free model, but you're a business. So, I mean, if it's not too intrusive, how are you, I mean, how will you keep this going in the future? I mean, do you have other plans to expand, or is this the social benefit side of your business and you support it through like other products? I mean,
Yeah. So that's such a good question. And it's one that comes up on almost every call we have with anybody right now. They're like, so what's the plan? And it's a great question. So we know we have a couple different sort of avenues we could take, and we want our cake and we want to have our cake and eat it too, right? Which is tough. So, well, if I had to guess, we're going to come out on the other side with a bit of a mixed sort of approach, where just kind of like you say, like this, the justice tech part of what we do is key and really important. So there'll always be something that is really defined to solve that problem, or to help, not to solve the problem, to help with solving the problem, but that doesn't mean we're, just going to continue to spend our own money. We own the whole company ourselves right now, like it's bootstrapped. So obviously you can't grow forever in that model. So something's going to have to happen. So we probably need to make that decision in the next, I would say, weeks and months. And we are consulting with a few folks and really thinking hard about that. And we're trying to figure out a way that we can do everything that we want, which is hard. But considering some of the stuff that Rich has got on the development timeline, he mentioned one of them, but there's a couple more that are really exciting and interesting and could potentially be where there's perhaps a paid tier or something like that. So we're playing with that, and that is a really important question. But one thing it makes me think about too, that I think this audience would be interested in pondering a bit, is when you think about, so kind of like, what is our responsibility, right? As an ethical AI company, right? Is what we're trying to, not that there's any, badge that you get for that, but just like, that's how we like to think of ourselves, because AI is scary in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of ethical concerns, including bias and all kinds of stuff that's, happens in AI. When you think about the law, right? And you think about what it can mean and how it could change the practice of law, and just even how outcomes, come. I mean, even the head of the Supreme Court, Justice Roberts, was writing about AI. It's crazy. Like, it's on everybody's lips. So, what if it becomes something that you can only really access if you can afford it, right? So right now, if it becomes this extra layer that the big firms can pay for because they have enough money to pay for that extra add-on from whatever company it is, have that AI plugin. So all of a sudden they have this incredible competitive advantage, right, over other litigants, right, which they already have. So it's, if unless there's companies and founders and justice tech people, innovators who are ready to fill that space and to say, hey, we still need to like build this in an equitable way, you could see the market trend would just push it all towards the people who are already best positioned to, you know, have their cases and their legal situation have a better outcome than the folks who aren't. Like, some people have been really, you know, interested in thinking about like people in prison, like people who are trying to do their own research, you know, pro se litigants, all kinds of things. So I think that's a really important consideration in anything we do as a business or an organization. Is anybody could take the money and just say, good for me, you know, but that's not really what it's about. And AI is so much promise to solve problems, create problems too, but solving problems is where it's very exciting. So hopefully many people will follow that path. So that's what we hope.
And we are kind of in that position now.
Tara's very motivating.
I really believe it. I'm a true believer. I really have drank the Kool-Aid, like a whole big jar of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I was saying, we are in that position now. I mean, legal aid organizations in general don't have access to, you know, new AI tools. I mean, they may be in development, you know, so we're already seeing that. And then think about the people who don't qualify for legal aid, or, you know, we're already in a, you know, an uneven playing field, even without thinking about AI. So it's a huge problem. So we've touched on some of the next questions that I was going to ask, but I wanted to get into one thing that I know that you're involved in. And I guess, I believe you're members of the Justice Tech Association.
We are.
And would you mind sharing what drew you to that organization? And if you have any other resources or tools that young legal tech companies might find beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Justice Tech Association is fantastic. And I think found them pretty early on. And I remember just getting very excited because I saw I found their website somehow, and I read about what they did. And I just, oh, you know, ding, 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 like these are my people, right? These are my people. So we applied for membership, which, you know, it's an application. It's not going to be an automatic thing. You know, they're very careful about who they let, you know, into the group, and making sure your mission is aligned. And so we, you know, I remember when we got the approval, I was just so excited. So they're an amazing group of people who are very, you know, supportive of each other, but also just have an incredible range of products and the things that people are developing, and really creative justice tech products out there. So I highly recommend taking a look at their website and seeing the different tools. It really runs the gamut, and a lot of it, you know, does relate to AI, not all of it, but there are some really interesting companies in there worth checking out. So that was a great networking opportunity.
Maya is so
sorry, go ahead.
supportive. I was going to say Maya's so nice and so supportive, and we've reached out to her kind of for some advisory questions. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's amazing. And that's just something about the legal tech. So everybody out there, like, give yourselves a pat on the back, because the people in legal tech are incredible. Like, I've worked in a lot of different fields. I've worked with many different types of people, but there's something about people in legal tech. They're just incredibly generous with their thinking. There's just this sense of camaraderie. Like, people kind of want to see each other succeed. There's a lot of sharing of information.
Can I say something, Cara, to that point?
Yes.
One of our first meetings this past, it's probably in August or September, we kind of launched in earnest at the end of July, beginning of August. So we found out that there's this legal tech expert who was kind of near us, just a couple towns over. So we met him for coffee. And so we met, and he's like, you guys should look at this, and this, you know, we were taking notes. And I was just sitting there the whole time like, what's in it for you? Like what I'm so used to people wanting something or him being okay, here's a bill for $600 or he's like, no, I just want to help you guys. I want you guys to
Hmm.
succeed. It was so incredible. And we
Hmm.
found that from everybody.
Hmm. Yeah, it's an amazing community. And there's just this feeling, I think, of, I don't know, camaraderie or something. And I don't know, it's pretty special, I think.
It really is a unique field. You know, when I was in law school, I went with Kevin O'Keefe, who is the founder of LexBlog, and interviewed legal tech company founders at ILTACon.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just amazing to hear the stories and hear what prompted, you know, the founders to start their companies and what, you know, kept them up at night, and, you know, all the bootstrapping stories and how many bowls of ramen, you know, we heard about, you know, as they're trying
Right.
to get their business going and,
Mhm.
you know, be able to support themselves as well. So yes, I would certainly agree. And I think there's also, you know, the subset of legal tech that focus on, you know, the legal aid market and the justice
Mhm.
market that is also, you know, even maybe even closer knit
Mhm.
and more helpful. And certainly in my career, I've had people who have been such great mentors and continue to be so, and from the legal tech community. So I can
Mhm.
certainly agree with that experience.
Yeah, it's great.
So um, as you move forward and as you start thinking about these bigger issues and the bigger picture of keeping, you know, funding and how, you know, what the future looks like, how will you measure the impact of describe.ai?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, certainly straight up, you know, users in search, like how much are people using it? And we can very easily, you know, we've been watching that from day one, and it's just growing and growing. And so finding out, you know, if people are really using it is, it sounds very simple, but Rich has a very easy, you know, way to just sort of get the volume, see the volume, but also then you start to hear about, you know, are you hearing about it? Are you hearing, you know, that it's helping people? And I try to be very active. It's interesting. Speaking of social media, I one of the things I'm finding very interesting is that LinkedIn is the place for legal tech people to connect. It's so funny because, like, no offense, LinkedIn, we love you, but like I've never seen anything where that's like the place. So it's actually kind of cool because it's very professional still. You don't have to worry about all that other kind of stuff that can happen on social media. Anyhow, so you know, you start to see, like, are people talking about it? Are people reaching out? So a lot of those metrics, you know, of course, and adoption from, you know, not just individuals, but different types of like legal aid groups or law schools or, you know, associations, things like that. If we can start to get people really, you know, sort of saying, hey, to our members, this is a thing to use. This is a, you know, a tool. So Rich, you probably have more
Oh, I
data
mean,
and metrics, but
we've had lawyers talk to us, like we try to talk to customers
Mhm.
and we've had them tell us like when a new client walks in the door and they have a experience that they don't know too much about, like they have you actually used our tool and typed in whatever it is that the potential client has, and they find the case law and they get themselves acclimated. And so it's been a quick way for them to do that. And it's exciting to actually hear that people use it for real. And like, I don't know, I think the first time that happened was just kind of a cool moment when you realize
Mhm.
that people weren't just typing in ice cream truck, they were actually using it
Mhm.
for a purpose. And that was rewarding in itself, more
Mhm.
rewarding than saying we got 20 paying users. You know, I
Mhm.
think I'd rather have, back to your other point, I'd rather have like 100,000 people using it for free than 100 people paying us whatever, 20, 30 bucks a month.
Yeah,
You know,
agree.
I think it will be, I think that's more fun.
It is.
Well, that's
It's
amazing.
really
And
fun.
that's a beautiful thing, you know, when the greater good means more to, you know, to you personally than, you know, money in your pocket. I mean,
Mhm.
I know that's not exactly what you said, but I mean, that's you have the bigger picture in mind, I think, is what you're getting at there.
Yeah, and
So,
We
oh,
get
sorry.
these nice sized monthly Amazon gift cards for all the money we're spending on, because we get Amazon rewards. So
Hey,
that
but we're
get
lucky we
free
can do that.
microphones and free, I just use the points on different things.
And
It's
that's one
kind
of
of
the things
nice.
about being an entrepreneur in your, later in your life, right? Like you actually can do things a little differently. Like if you're 20 something, like you do have to eat the ramen, because you don't necessarily have the life where you can sort of do that. So yeah. And I would say one thing, this is very philosophical, so pardon me in advance, but the, the American society has kind of decided, in the startup community in a big picture way, is unless you're just making as much money as possible, like that's the only thing that means success, right? And I just think we can reject that, right? We don't have to say that that's true. Like for technology, entrepreneurs, like, is it only about that, or can it be about some money and some social good or doing something important? When you think about, it's a different space, but people who are looking at environmental tech, trying to figure out ways to stop global warming and things like that, like there are other outcomes that can be measured as success that aren't just dollars and cents. And I think our society has went too far with the startup world only caring about these unicorns and things like that. There's other ways to measure value, I think.
well, I think that will resonate very much with our audience, which tends to be, legal aid, legal tech, IT, and, much of that arena. So they certainly
Our
could
people.
they certainly could be working in another field and making, immense amounts higher than what they are doing working for a legal aid organization. So certainly will resonate with that group. Um, I guess we're in the point now that what is one question that you wish someone asked you in an interview? And I'll let you both answer that.
Oh, that's so good. What a good question. I guess always a good question is, what advice do you give to the person right behind you in line? Like the next person who's trying to do this, right? So that's always a fun question to think. Like, and the other one is, write a headline about yourself in 5 years, about your success of your company. What would that
Wow.
headline be? Those are two good ones I like.
Well, and I guess I didn't clarify this. Along with the question, what would your answer be?
Oh,
So-
oh, I'm
was gonna say,
sorry.
you got
Sorry.
yourself in there.
Oh my God, I got myself into it. Okay, so I would say for the first one where I say who's behind me in line, I'm going to first see if they are a woman too, because that, as progressive and great as legal tech is, like, I feel like female founders are a little bit few and far between. And I have to say that the women that I've met so far in this field are just badass. And like, I think they're amazing. And the amount of like intellectual capital in the women leaders in this space are incredible. So I'd quickly be like, okay, I'm going to connect you to this person, that person. This is who you need to talk to about this. And I've already gotten that, so much of that. So I would make sure, and it's not that, sorry, fellas, like I'm not saying I would ignore you, but there's just a special place in my heart for helping female entrepreneurs. That's for sure. So I would definitely do that. And then the headline, oh gosh, now that is an awful, difficult thing. How about, how about DescrybeAI inspires a revolution in access to, no, wait, DescrybeAI inspires hundreds of other justice tech companies to follow suit, something like that.
Awesome.
I don't write headlines in my real job, as you could probably tell. Rich.
We got the point.
Yeah,
don't corner yourself like this.
Yeah, mine will be more bland than Kara's. I would say, like, what is the barrier to entry to keep somebody else from just doing what you're doing? Like, why couldn't somebody else just summarize all these opinions and make their own little search engine? And my answer to that would be related to your ramen stuff. For the last year, I've been having multiple computers just running 24 7 around the clock. And every morning, every night, before I go to bed, I make sure that they're still running. And every morning when I wake up, at least one of there's like 11 different things running. At least one of them will have crashed overnight. Sometimes all of them if the internet went out. And it's just like it's a lot of work. It's been a lot more work than I thought to get these going. And it's not instant. Like every single summary takes many seconds. So if you multiply like um we have 12 million chunks of opinions summarized. If you multiply that times like 6 seconds, that's a lot of time. I mean, I'm boggles my mind to even do that calculation in my head. So, but yeah, so it's was not easy. And so yeah, that the barrier to entry, there is a barrier to entry there. It would take a big commitment for somebody to kind of replicate this.
Yeah.
Certainly, and having summarized way too many cases while I was in law school,
Yeah.
this would have been wonderful.
Yeah.
But I can
And we
imagine.
did
I mean,
this,
there's just so many.
yeah, we did this abstract thing recently too. I know we have to wrap up here, but for a lot of cases, we have over 1 million of those done where it'll actually tell you like the parties and the analysis and the holding and the um facts of the case, and it's kind of cool to see at a glance exactly what's going on. And so if you search and you're lucky enough to see a little sparkle next to the case, then you could see one of our abstracts, and there's more and more of those every day. But
Oh,
that's
awesome.
another thing we did this fall that was a lot of fun. And those are
That's
still
fun.
cranking away too.
Super. So how can people support describe.ai and get involved with your mission?
Oh, that's great. So the number one thing we always tell people is try it. Come and try it. Like really, it's fun. There's no risk. It's just go on there, play around. It's great. So describe.ai, it's easy with a Y, describe with a Y. It's an easy one to remember. So yeah, so
Awesome.
come and visit us. Also definitely, if you're interested in what we're doing, sign up for our email list. We don't send out emails very often, but we do talk about access to justice, legal tech, and of course our own product and things like that. So we would really hope that you would find us there, and also follow us, find us on social, the social networks, and see us out there. But we are doing some conferences. We'll be out and about, and we love to talk to people. So if you're interested in what we're doing, if you want to drop us a line, just please do. We'd love to hear from you, and to let us know how this could help you would be great for us to hear.
Let's see. What is the best way for people to reach you?
Oh, yeah. So email's always great. So I'm Kara, just Kara at descrybe, descrybe.com. And Rich is the same, except for his starts with Rich rather than Kara. And if you can't remember either of our names, you can just do info at. So,
Or just find us on LinkedIn.
or find us on LinkedIn. Yep.
Yep. And Describe is on LinkedIn as well. So you can
Yeah.
find them that way. So this is our last parting question that we ask all of our guests. And what is your favorite app right now and why? Or what tech tip do you have for our listeners?
Oh, Rich, you take that one.
Tech tip. There's actually these things that you can use. Like I should have turned mine on for this because I'm using a laptop camera, but there's these things called virtual cameras. And so you could download these apps and you could adjust the picture, and I could have cropped myself in and all this and made it a lot better and fixed all the coloring and all, and then use that virtual camera as my input to Zoom. And so then I would have looked a lot better. So it's a tech tip that I didn't follow today.
Awesome.
Oh, well.
Well, I'm sure we'll have people experimenting. And Kara, did you have anything you wanted to add?
For
If
tech
not, that's
tip,
okay.
oh,
Or
well,
app.
no, I will. It's so funny. This isn't really very advanced, but I've been having a lot of fun playing with Adobe stock imagery because I put together the emails, and there's a lot of more like AI generated imagery in there now, which is is really fun. So you can get a little bit more creative. And I did, believe it or not, Bing, remember Bing? So you can go on Bing now and you can get some free credits to make your own imagery. If you want to play around with some AI generated imagery and have some fun with that, you can get a good chunk. Maybe it's 15 or something like that. I can't remember, that you can do for free. So Bing is making an effort to take over the search space. And I think they're being very smart about pulling in the open AI like that. So go play around with some AI imagery. It's a lot of fun.
It is, and the point system is, you're not limited to the number of images you can create. You just have points. Once you run out of points, it slows down. So
okay, good. Yeah.
That way, the people who are just creating many images don't overrun the system, so that other people who just need one, can't get in.
Oh, that's very clever. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I really appreciated hearing about Describe today. This really interesting. I'm just excited to see the future and how this will help with the access to justice issue, see what's going on. I believe you were headed to the ABA Tech Show. So if anyone's going there, will they be able to meet you there?
Going to Legal Week at the end of the month.
Yeah, we'll be at Legal Week in New York at the end of the month. We're up for a Enabling Access to Justice award, which is really fun. We're very excited. So wish us luck. ABA Tech Show, we may or may not be at. We haven't quite decided because we didn't make the finals.
I have several people. Yes, it's such a limited number that they get into the startup alley in the competition, but it's always a fun thing to watch. Although it's not as big, there's not as much of a following in the legal tech sector. So ITC tends to be the place where that sector goes to see what's new.
Nice.
But well, thank you again. I really appreciated talking to you. I appreciate you giving me your time, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone.